You know, I always believed that there were two kinds of women in the world, the ones who are loyal and the ones who aren't. The loyal ones, they're rare, but when you find them, you hold on. That's what I thought I had with Lisa. We'd been married for years, and I was sure I'd hit the jackpot. The idea of her betraying me, it never even crossed my mind. Sure, I'd seen people go through their own nightmare situations. Friends, colleagues, but not us. We were solid, or at least I thought we were. See, I had this belief, this unshakable faith, that if you're a good man, if you love your wife, work hard, and stay loyal, then you'll get that in return. I thought Lisa and I would grow old together, happy until the end. I was always there for her, working hard to give her the life she deserved. Sure, we didn't have a lot of money, but I figured love was enough, right? My biggest fear, though? I always dreaded the thought of her cheating, but I never gave it much attention. Lisa wasn't like that. I knew her. She wouldn't do something like that to me. Why would she? We had a good thing going. I'd convinced myself that nothing could go wrong. But deep down, there was always this tiny voice. You know the one. It creeps in when you least expect it. It whispers doubts, tells you things aren't as perfect as they seem. But I ignored it. I trusted her. Looking back now, it feels like I was living in a bubble of belief that everything was fine, that Lisa was the perfect wife, and that our marriage would last forever. It's funny how blind you can be when you want to believe in something so badly. But the thing about bubbles, they burst. I remember when things started to feel off. It wasn't anything big, not at first, just little things. Lisa had always been affectionate, always quick to smile when I walked through the door. But suddenly it was like she was somewhere else, distracted, distant. At first I told myself it was stress. She had a lot going on with work, and I figured maybe she was just tired. But it didn't stop. Conversations became shorter. She started spending more time on her phone, and when I'd ask what she was doing, she'd just say it was nothing. I shrugged it off. We all get busy, right? Relationships go through phases. That's what I told myself anyway. But then there were the nights when she'd come home late. No explanation, just I had to stay late at the office. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Lisa had never given me a reason not to trust her before. So I didn't push. I didn't ask too many questions. Instead, I kept convincing myself that everything was fine. But those tiny cracks were there. And once you notice them, it's hard to stop seeing them. The way she'd avoid eye contact sometimes, or how she'd get irritated over the smallest things. But I brushed it off, didn't I? I mean, what could I do? Accuse her of something when I didn't have proof. So, I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch. Everyone has them, right? Looking back, though, I think deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to admit it. It wasn't until I heard it from someone else that the bubble really started to crack. One day, I'm out mowing the lawn, minding my own business, when my neighbor, Mark, comes over. Now, Mark and I, we've never been that close. We'd say hi in passing, but that was about it. So when he walks up with that look on his face, I already knew something was up. He starts with the usual small talk, how's the weather, how's work, and I could tell he was building up to something. And then, out of nowhere, he says it. David, I don't know how to tell you this, but I've seen Lisa with another man. Just like that. No warning, nothing. I stood there, my hands gripping the handle of the lawnmower, not sure if I'd heard him right. My mind started racing. What did he mean? Lisa, my Lisa, with someone else. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be true. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice came out strained. Come on, Mark, that's ridiculous. But he wasn't laughing. He looked dead serious. And then he started giving me details, times, places. He'd seen them together more than once. At first, I couldn't wrap my head around it. I didn't want to. How could this be happening? Lisa wouldn't do this to me. Not Lisa. I remember feeling this wave of anger. But it wasn't just at her. It was at Mark, too. Who was he to tell me this? To come into my life and throw a grenade right in the middle of it? Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, to pretend he hadn't said anything. But another part of me already knew. I stood there, trying to process it all. But my mind kept going in circles. Could he be lying? Was this some kind of sick joke? Or had I just been blind this whole time? My stomach felt like it had dropped out from under me. I didn't want to believe him. I didn't want to believe any of it. But the cracks were already there, weren't they? The late nights, the distance, they all started to make sense. And yet, I still couldn't accept it. Not fully. Not yet. I just nodded, muttered something like, "I'll take care of it," and walked away. But inside, I was a mess. The belief bubble I'd been living in for so long had finally burst, and now all I had left were questions. Was Mark telling the truth? And if he was, what was I supposed to do with that truth? I walked back inside the house, but everything felt off. It was like the air had changed, thick and heavy. Mark's words kept echoing in my head. "I've seen Lisa with another man." No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. But at the same time, I refused to believe it. I couldn't believe it. This was Lisa we were talking about. The woman I married, the woman I trusted with my life. There had to be a mistake. Maybe Mark was confused. Maybe he saw someone else. Or maybe it wasn't what he thought. People jump to conclusions all the time, right? He didn't know her like I did. I tried to push it down, ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. All those nights she came home late, all those moments when she seemed distant. I'd brushed them off as stress, but now they felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. I kept going back and forth in my head. One minute, I was convinced Mark was wrong, and the next, I found myself questioning everything. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the signs? But then, just as quickly, I'd pull myself back. No, Lisa wouldn't do this. She's loyal. We've built a life together. She wouldn't throw that away. I spent the next few days trying to act normal, like everything was fine. But inside, I was spiraling. Every time Lisa walked into the room, I felt a pit in my stomach. I watched her more closely, looking for any signs that would prove Mark wrong, or God forbid, prove him right. I wanted to ask her, to confront her, but what if I was wrong? What if I was just letting some random neighbor's words mess with my head? But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The truth, or at least the possibility of it, was eating me alive. Still, I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. I kept clinging to the idea that maybe, just maybe, this was all a misunderstanding. That Lisa was still the woman I thought she was, the woman I believed she was. But the doubt was there now. And once it's there, it's impossible to ignore. As the days went on, the doubt didn't just stay in my head, it started eating away at me, gnawing at who I was. I started questioning everything about myself. Was this my fault? Was I not good enough for her? I mean, let's be honest, I'm no millionaire. I work hard, but we've never had a life of luxury. Maybe that's why she did it. Maybe I wasn't providing enough for her. Maybe I wasn't enough. It's funny how quickly your mind can turn against you when you start believing the worst. I thought about all the times I struggled to make ends meet, the times I'd skipped out on things, because money was tight. Maybe that's why she started looking elsewhere. Maybe she needed someone with more status, more wealth, someone who could give her the kind of life I never could. It's a vicious cycle, doubting yourself like that. I started blaming myself for everything, every argument we'd had, every time I'd been too tired to go out, every little thing that made me feel like I wasn't living up to what a husband should be. And the more I thought about it, the more it made sense in a twisted way. Maybe if I'd been more successful, more accomplished, she wouldn't have gone looking for someone else. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't like what I saw. I wasn't just angry at Lisa anymore, I was angry at myself. Angry for not being enough, for not being the kind of man who could keep his wife from straying. But the worst part? I couldn't even bring myself to talk to her about it. I couldn't confront her, because a part of me believed that if I did, I'd have to face the truth. And the truth was that maybe, just maybe, I was the reason she was drifting away. I couldn't take it anymore. The questions, the doubt, the constant second-guessing, it was all too much. I knew I had to confront her, to hear it from her own mouth, whether what Mark had said was true. I had to know. It was late one evening. Lisa had just come home, looking as tired and distracted as she had for weeks. I sat on the couch, trying to act casual, but inside, my heart was racing. I couldn't keep pretending. "Lisa," I said, my voice more strained than I wanted it to be, "we need to talk." She gave me this look, confused at first, and I could see the walls go up almost immediately. She knew something was coming, but I don't think she expected what I was about to say. "I need to ask you something," I continued, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Are you seeing someone else?" The words hung in the air, heavier than I'd ever imagined. There was a long silence. Lisa blinked, stunned, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, waiting for her response. At first, she laughed, a nervous, uneasy laugh that didn't sit right. "What? David, what are you talking about?" she said, trying to brush it off. But I didn't budge. I could feel the anger bubbling up, the frustration that had been building for weeks, finally pushing me to stand my ground. "I'm serious, Lisa," I said, my voice firmer now. "I heard something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Is there someone else?" She froze. That was the moment I knew. She didn't say anything, didn't deny it right away. Instead, she just stood there, staring at me, her face pale, and that was all the answer I needed. In that silence, everything I'd been afraid of became real. "Mark told me," I added, pushing the knife in further. "He's seen you with someone else, more than once. Is it true?" Lisa's face crumpled, and she finally spoke. "David, I don't know what to say." Her voice was shaky, her eyes pleading with me, but I didn't want her to plead. I wanted the truth. I deserved the truth. "Tell me the truth," I repeated, feeling the anger surge. "After everything we've been through, after all these years, I deserve that much. Just tell me." There was another long pause before she finally nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "There's someone else." And just like that, my world collapsed. The words hit me like a freight train, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I'd known deep down, but hearing her say it, admit it, was a whole different kind of pain. It was the kind of pain that cuts deep, the kind that leaves scars you don't recover from. "I'm sorry," she said, but it didn't matter. Her apology felt hollow. The damage was done. Everything I thought I knew about us, about her, was shattered in an instant. I just stood there, numb, trying to process it all. The anger, the heartbreak, The betrayal. It all came crashing down at once, and I had no idea what to do with it. After Lisa admitted it, I didn't know how to feel. It was like my whole world had flipped upside down, and I was caught in the middle of the wreckage. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't feel anything but this deep, aching pain in my chest. It was like someone had reached inside me and ripped my heart out, leaving nothing but emptiness behind. I sat alone that night, staring at the walls, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head, every smile, every laugh, every memory we'd built together. It all felt like a lie now. How could she do this? How could everything we'd built come crashing down so easily? Part of me still loved her, and that was the hardest part to deal with. How could I still love someone who had betrayed me like this? I hated her for what she did, but I couldn't shut off the years we'd spent together. And now I was stuck between two impossible choices: to stay with someone who had broken my trust, or to walk away from the only life I'd known for so long. It felt like I was trapped in this whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. One minute, I'd be furious, ready to throw everything away. The next, I'd be devastated, thinking about the possibility of losing her forever. How could I have let this happen? How did we get here? I kept going over the choices I'd made, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Maybe if I'd been more attentive, if I'd made more money, if I'd been a better husband. But the truth is, I knew it wasn't all on me. No matter what I did or didn't do, she made her choice. And that's what hurt the most. For days, I walked around like a zombie, barely able to function. The heartbreak was all-consuming, suffocating. I didn't know how to move forward, or if I even could. My mind was constantly racing, replaying everything she'd said, every moment I'd missed, every red flag I'd ignored. It felt like my entire life had unraveled, and I didn't know how to put the pieces back together. The worst part was the silence of an empty house, the silence in my mind when I had no answers. I didn't know what to do with the pain. I was lost, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know how to find my way back. In the days that followed, I found myself trapped in this impossible decision: whether to stay with Lisa or walk away. It felt like I was at a crossroads, and no matter which way I turned, I was bound to lose something. There was a part of me that wanted to forgive her. I kept thinking about everything we'd been through, the life we'd built together. Wasn't marriage about forgiveness? About working through the hard times? People make mistakes, right? Maybe we could get past this. Maybe we could fix what was broken. But every time I thought about staying, I felt this wave of anger rising inside me. How could I ever trust her again? How could I stay with someone who had betrayed me in the worst possible way? On the other hand, the idea of leaving felt like tearing apart everything I knew. I wasn't just walking away from her. I was walking away from the life we'd shared, from the memories, the routines, the dreams we'd had together. Could I really let all of that go? Was I strong enough to start over, to rebuild my life without her? Every day it felt like I was swinging between these two extremes: stay or leave, forgive or walk away. I'd look at Lisa, and some days I saw the woman I married, the woman I loved. Other days I saw the woman who had shattered my trust. It was exhausting, this constant back and forth. And no matter what I decided, I knew there'd be no easy answers. In the end, I knew that staying would mean rebuilding everything from scratch. Trust, love, everything. And that wasn't something that could happen overnight. Could I do that? Could I look at her every day and not see the betrayal? Could I move past it? Or would it haunt us forever? I knew I couldn't make this decision lightly, and I knew there'd be no turning back once I did. But at some point, I had to choose: stay and try to rebuild, or walk away and start over on my own. Either way, my life was never going to be the same again. After days of wrestling with my thoughts, I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. I needed perspective, someone to help me figure out which way to go. So, I reached out to the people who knew me best: my friends, my family. I started with my closest friend, Mike. We'd known each other for years, and if there was anyone I could count on to give it to me straight, it was him. I remember sitting across from him at our usual spot, laying it all out: the affair, the confrontation, the sleepless nights since. He listened quietly, his face grim, but not surprised. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "Man, I don't know what to tell you," he said. "This is big. You gotta think long and hard about whether you can live with this or whether it's time to move on." His words didn't offer a clear answer, but they stuck with me. Could I live with this? Would staying with Lisa mean living with this shadow forever? Or was moving on my only real option? Next, I turned to my sister. She was always the calm, rational one in the family. When I told her what happened, she was furious on my behalf, angrier than I'd ever seen her. "You deserve better than this, David," she said, her voice sharp. "If she could betray you like that, what's stopping her from doing it again?" Her words cut through me, but they made sense. What was stopping Lisa from doing it again? How could I ever trust her, really? But then my mum, always the voice of forgiveness, said something different when I spoke to her. "People make mistakes, David," she told me. "Sometimes love can survive even the worst betrayals, but only if both of you are willing to fight for it." And there it was, the spectrum of advice. Mike's caution, my sister's anger, and my mom's hope. Everyone had a different view, and none of it made my decision any easier. But what I did realize was that, at the end of the day, no one could make this choice for me. It was my life, my marriage, my future, and no matter what anyone else said, I was the one who'd have to live with the consequences. After talking to everyone, I realized something. It didn't matter what they thought. This was my life. I couldn't keep letting the pain and betrayal define me. No matter what I decided about Lisa, I had to start putting myself back together. I needed to heal, for my own sake. So, I took a step back. I stopped obsessing over what she did, over the past that I couldn't change. I stopped trying to find answers in every conversation, in every moment we had shared. Instead, I turned inward. I focused on myself for the first time in a long time. I started asking myself the tough questions. What do I really want? What kind of life do I want to live, with or without her? It wasn't easy. There were days when I'd wake up feeling like I'd never be able to move past the hurt, and other days when I felt a glimmer of hope, a small spark telling me that I could rebuild. I focused on those small sparks, those little moments where I felt even a shred of strength returning. I started spending more time with people who lifted me up, friends who didn't have all the answers, but who reminded me that I was still David, that I wasn't just the man whose wife cheated. I was more than that. And slowly, I began to believe it too. I picked up old hobbies I'd forgotten about, things I used to love before everything got so complicated. I spent more time outdoors, went on long walks just to clear my head, and little by little, I felt myself starting to heal. Not because everything was okay, but because I was learning how to be okay with myself, even in the middle of the mess. The road ahead was still unclear, but one thing was certain. I was done letting this define me. Whether I stayed with Lisa or not, I was going to focus on becoming whole again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could. It wasn't something I planned. In fact, after everything that had happened with Lisa, I didn't think I'd be ready to meet someone new for a long time. Trust felt like a distant concept, something I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to fully give again. But then, I met Emily. It happened when I least expected it. I was out with a group of friends, trying to enjoy myself, still processing everything I'd been through. And there she was, warm, kind, with this easy laugh that instantly made me feel comfortable. We got to talking, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself opening up to someone without that heavy weight in my chest. At first, I was hesitant. I mean, how could I trust someone after what I'd been through? Every time I felt a connection, my mind would remind me of the betrayal, of the pain. But there was something different about Emily. She wasn't pushing for anything. She didn't expect me to be anyone other than who I was. Flaws, scars, and all. We started spending more time together, slowly. I was cautious, careful not to dive in too quickly. But with every conversation, every moment we shared, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. Not just in her, but in the possibility of love itself. Emily never made me feel rushed. She understood where I was coming from, and that patience, that understanding, made all the difference. Little by little, I found myself letting go of the walls I'd built around me. Trust wasn't going to come overnight, but with Emily, I felt like I could take those steps, one at a time. It wasn't just about love. It was about rebuilding something inside me that I thought was lost forever. And with Emily, I started to believe that it was possible. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't healed completely, but I was moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to live again. I didn't know if I'd ever feel this way again. After everything that had happened with Lisa, I thought that part of my life was over. The part where you feel like you can trust someone, where love feels safe, where happiness doesn't come with an asterisk attached. But with Emily, something changed. It wasn't like I woke up one day and everything was perfect. Healing doesn't work like that. It took time, patience, and a lot of self-reflection. But one day, I realized something. I wasn't thinking about the past as much anymore. The hurt, the betrayal, the pain that used to consume me. It was starting to fade. Emily had become a big part of my life, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was happy. Not the kind of happiness that's flashy or loud, but a quiet, steady happiness. The kind where you wake up in the morning and look forward to the day. The kind where you can laugh again, where you can trust that there's someone beside you who cares about you just for who you are. With Emily, I felt like I could finally be myself. There was no pretending, no hiding. She saw me, really saw me, and she accepted everything. My scars, my insecurities, the baggage I carried from my past. And instead of making me feel weak, she made me feel stronger. Like I was capable of love again. Like I deserved it. There were moments when I still felt the weight of what had happened with Lisa, but they became fewer and fewer. I wasn't living in that shadow anymore. I was stepping into something new, something better. Emily helped me see that trust could be rebuilt, that love wasn't a one-time thing that once lost could never be found again. I realized that life goes on. It's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes it knocks you down harder than you think you can handle. But if you keep moving, if you keep pushing forward, there's always a chance to rebuild, to find happiness again. With Emily, I discovered that love didn't have to be perfect to be real. It just had to be honest. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally leave the past behind. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me anymore. I was defined by what I chose to do with it. And in choosing to love again, to trust again, I found something I thought was lost forever: my happiness.